Polyamorous people are not mentioning their sex lives to their kids any more than any other parent. Their kids are equally like, ew, mom and dad do what? As any other teenager.
Welcome to Parenthood Prep, the only show that helps sleep-deprived parents and overwhelmed parents-to-be to successfully navigate those all-important early years with their baby, toddler, and child. If you're ready to provide the best care for your newborn, manage those toddler tantrums, and grow with your child, you're in the right place. Now, here's your host, baby and parenting expert, Devon Clement.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Parenthood Prep podcast. My name is Margaret Mason Tate and I am filling in for Devon Clement this week. I'm so excited because with me today, I have Laura Boyle. Laura Boyle is a familiar name to you because you have read about her in the Boston Globe. You have maybe read about her in Cosmopolitan when you're getting your nails done. You might have heard what she's been talking about on her podcast, Ready for Polyamory. There's also an accompanying blog. And did I mention that there's also a book published in 2021? Oh, and then there's a second book published 2024, Monogamy in This Economy, Finances, Childbearing, and Other Practical Concerns of Polyamory. I am so excited to have Laura Boyle on the podcast today. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Margaret. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a long intro, and I understand that, but I believe that everybody deserves their bona fides, and you have a whole lot of them.
Well, I appreciate you very much for listing out so many of my credits. You did miss the time that I was in The Economist saying that all polyamorous people have a scheduling kink, which my uncle saw and immediately clipped and sent to my parents in the mail.
In the USPS, God love him. He bought a stamp for that.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
I wonder what stamp he used.
I don't remember, to be honest, but I do remember my mother then immediately calling me.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, so the reason that I'm interviewing you today, and specifically me and not Devon, is because I, like you, have myself been polyamorous since the early aughts.
Mm-hmm.
Something about that time of the season in the life really helped. I think a liberal arts education also helped, would you say?
Something was in the water, wasn't it?
Yeah. For real. But now, it's been 108 years or something like that since then. And now we're both parents and navigating the kind of situations and scenarios that people who are not doing consensual non-monogamy or polyamory, they're not dealing with this stuff. And so today on the pod, I'd really love to discuss, a couple of different things from pregnancy to, the tweens. We both have 12-year-olds, I think, right?
We do. My son turned 12 last week, actually.
Oh, man. Wow. Yeah. Mine was March the 13th. Golly Moses. It's a fine time to have a 12-year-old. I would like to start just by saying you were pregnant and polyamorous at the same time. Talk to me a little bit about what that looked like in your relationship structure at that time.
Well, so I do not recommend that people do pregnancy and polyamory exactly the way I did, because I did not have a planned pregnancy. I did not go into this with any of the intention and deliberation that I apply to my relationships as a whole, especially today. My early 20s were not a time where I was anywhere near as deliberate as I am now. And so what had happened for me was that I had a failure of birth control. And this meant that we very rapidly had to decide what I was doing about this pregnancy, what that meant to the relationships that I was in, and what it meant for how I was living. In pretty rapid succession, while I was in my first year of law school, I discovered this pregnancy in the September of my first year of law school. That combination of factors was not a fun time.
No, 1L is not when you want to see the stick pop.
No, yeah, L1 is not a great time to be doing all of this. So I gave birth a little premature in mid-April and was writing exams mid-May, 5 weeks postpartum. So just for an example of how that year went, even outside the relationships. Within the relationships, my now ex-husband decided that he did not want to parent. And so that meant that we started moving into unnesting and filing for divorce while I was pregnant, while I was in law school. Not a great combination. My other partner decided that, yes, he wanted to parent regardless of whose biological child this was. And luckily, it turned out that the biology matched who wanted to parent. But there were pretty good odds that it wasn't going to, because based on just the math of like who I had been with how many times in the month where this IUD had failed, the math looked like it was going to be my ex-husband. So we had to wait for the test to come back to say one way or the other what the paternity of this child was. It was a very stressful time for me as a human being.
Sure.
But in the end, we sort of figured this out, right? So my boyfriend, who had one other partner, was like, I am happy to parent with you. My one other partner is interested in staying with me as I figure out these life transitions. I would love it if the two of you got to know each other better and figured out if you guys want to be like long-term, figure out your lives together partners, even though you're not romantically involved. If you are, we'll all do life together and figure out this family that you and I are going to have. So I was like, okay, this is a lot of big, scary life transitions at once, but God damn it, I'm 25 years old and I'm going to do it.
So you stacked them all on top of each other. First year of law school, divorce, baby, paternity, relationship with the person who was choosing to parent with you, relationship with that person's other person.
Yep. We had met at a party once prior to me finding out that I was pregnant. And so then we were like, let's figure out whether or not we are compatible enough to like live in the same place, whether our values are compatible enough to raise a human together within 9 months. It was a really accelerated timeline. I do not recommend that method to anyone. But sometimes life gives you an accelerated timeline in a way that you are not necessarily prepared for.
Yeah. And dealing with prematurity. I missed one. I missed one of the stack.
Luckily, he was only like 35 and 5. It was not like a horrible amount of prematurity. His lungs were fine, but enough that it was hairy, right?
Yeah, indeed. Mine was 7 weeks premature and it was not awesome.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
No, me. Hey, buddy, we were in that together in so many different parallels. It's really crazy how many of the same experiences we were experiencing down to the year and sometimes even down to the month. Absolutely bananas. So if we were going to recommend, so if we were going to take all of what you learned and then recommend, I don't want to say the opposite, but the opposite, what would the inverse of all of that look like?
Well, so look, in the years since, I have met lots of other polyamorous parents. In the years since, I have had the luck, the privilege, the excellent ability to work with folks within our community in a bunch of different capacities. And one of them in recent years has been in a space of organizing and of coaching. And in that process, I've met lots of folks who are in polyamorous families, both in sort of dyad couple units and in larger units. And the thing that most often correlates with like long-term success of their relationships and their families is having been intentional about the way they formed those, right? So
yeah, the foundation really is a foundation.
Who would have thought, right? But not that folks don't make work in the long term, things that kind of fall together sometimes, but people who approach things more intentionally, who really sort of check in on those core values things, whether it's to do with your finances, whether it's to do with what you kind of intend about child rearing in the long term, or how you intend to like build your life in terms of where you want to live, in terms of whether you want to stay in the same place in the long term, or what sorts of places you intend to move over time. Having that kind of core, even about whether or not you intend to add other people to your household long term, right? Because a lot of the time, not getting clear on that sort of thing and finding out that one member of a 3-person household is like, of course other people will move in with us over time. And everyone else in the household is like, the fuck do you mean?
Yeah. Who?
Is a big challenge, right? Because then that third person meets someone who they really vibe with, and they're like, well, it's been like 9 months and I really vibe with this person. Let's start talking about what timeline they can move in on. And everyone else is like, the what? The whomst? No, sir. Right? No, ma'am. That's not a plan. And so a lot of monogamous scripting that says, of course, if you're emotionally invested in someone, you will naturally do a whole relationship escalator with them. You will necessarily combine finances and move in with them and do all of these steps, doesn't apply in non-monogamy. And reaching a point where we're actually at peace with that and we're actually comfortable with not doing some of those escalator steps with our partners who we're most deeply emotionally entangled with becomes a really big challenge for people who are already entangled with folks who they're co-parenting with. I think this is also a challenge for divorced monogamous parents sometimes, because they go, oh, the obvious thing is that I will find someone who can be a step parent to my children. But sometimes that's not actually what your dating life needs right now. What your dating life needs is someone who is emotionally safe for you and safe enough for your children, but not necessarily looking to be in that role for them.
I cannot speak highly enough of the experience of dating people who that's not even on the table for. The relationship develops a completely unique kind of flavor that is inexplicable unless you're experiencing it, but I highly recommend getting you some of that.
And being like a person who might have some influence on your child. They will be a safe adult who is present, but they're not like trying to fill in that role because your child has parents, is actually a really valuable additional adult role.
Fully agree. Undersung.
Yeah. And like the researcher Elizabeth Sheff talks about these additional adults in her book, The Polyamorous Next Door. She calls these additional bonds polyaffective bonds, the connections between like metas or between children and additional adults who aren't their parents. But when I did a study of it's between 400 and 500 people responded to me and the survey that I did. And then I did follow-up interviews with, and it was 100 some odd of them. And so folks like chatted with me on the phone. Some of them got on FaceTime and walked me through their houses and chatted with me about what their polycules were like. The cutest were when like stay-at-home moms had their kids with them and like the children would steal the iPad and run away from them while mom was trying to tell me things. It was great. The experience of researching was amazing, and I turned it into the book Monogamy in This Economy. And it really reinforced a lot of the stuff that Eli Sheff said in their research, but also it covered a lot of this stuff of the people who had the sort of least fraught metamor relationships and the least fraught relationships with people who didn't live in their homes, who were in their polycule, were people who were comfortable with those people having some kind of connection to their family, right? Who weren't like, oh, you need to be entirely outside of us. And also you don't need to be one of us except when you're sleeping. Like, it's not just you're entirely our family, but there's no room for you to sleep here. It's you get to have your own role, and we're actually comfortable with what that role is when it works. And I know that sounds like sort of automatically intuitive or really obvious or whatever, but in practice, that's really a hard balance to strike for a lot of people, I think.
Well, and it behooves being articulated. It really behooves, I think it helps a lot to articulate these things because, of course, having myriad safe, close adults who are, contributing different types of humor and media and, energy and all different types of like material and immaterial resources. Of course, that makes sense that we should have lots of those folks around, but actually articulating why and what it does for our relationships and specifically our kids' relationships to themselves, to us as parents, to each other, it matters. That's why I'm so glad you wrote the book.
And I think in some cases it also makes the network more resilient to change too, right? When people have breakups, it gives more people who can help us and our kids mediate those, or like traverse them?
Yeah. So when I am speaking about polyamory in my own life, specifically the way that I do it, one of the very first responses from a lot of the more skeptical, I guess, people are, so then they've met this person and then what if you break up? I was like, wow, we probably will. A lot of relationships end in breakups. It's all right. We can navigate that.
I mean, so first, there is that argument that monogamous people break up all the time. Second, one of the most sort of important foundational relationships in a lot of kids' lives are one that disappear every year. It's their teachers. And I get that, like, teachers don't fully disappear off the face of the earth, but they become a much smaller role in children's lives after a year. And so similarly, what we end up creating for our children in the way we have networks help us navigate this is we take it from the person completely disappears out of the child's life to our partners and our additional people, our friends can help us have the person sort of slowly fade out of our child's life. So long as the breakup isn't over something like a complete lack of safety, you can slow roll someone out of your kid's life instead of having them disappear overnight. And also, like, the adults are in direct relationship with us. Often they are not so deeply embedded in a child's life that the child is like, oh my God, this adult. It's really that we're more often concerned about what if their children and our children are close. And so it's about figuring out, how do we keep children in relationship to one another? And most of us actually have good scripts for that. Most of our kids have friends whose parents we don't like that much. We know how to do it.
Absolutely. And listen, far be it for me to remove a good trampoline partner from the mix. I would never. And so it is a lot easier to accommodate those, especially, I mean, the older that they get, the more it's just a question of like dropping off and picking up. And, anybody can do that in a civil and cordial way. I find that the breakups that I have in non-monogamy tend to be less fraught and a little bit easier to navigate. But I know that's a big catch-all and certainly not everybody's experience, but it is mine.
And I think a lot of this is just people's personalities and their choices too. And so we can't mediate for that. If you're someone who had really dramatic breakups in monogamy, you may also have really dramatic breakups in non-monogamy. We do not change who you are just by changing your relationship style. So you know yourself best.
So this is a bit of a gear switch, but I did want to talk about it because you write a lot about finance in your second book. And I think that a lot of people want to hear about that. But I would love to gear it specifically towards pregnancy, postpartum, leave, parental leave, who's doing what, who's living where. I would love to talk about your thoughts about the finances of an intentional pregnancy that we're like planning from the beginning. What are your thoughts there?
So in general, like with generally splitting finances in polyamory, deciding what items belong to who is the first step. And so if you're planning a pregnancy, similarly deciding who the pregnancy and the child belong to is step one, right? There's a whole section in my book about what makes someone a parent. And while often people are having those conversations because they already have children and they're trying to navigate whether or not someone who's coming in is going to be taking on a parental role, you should also have those conversations when you're thinking of having new children. Who wants to parent this child? Who is taking on the costs of this new child? If you're living in a household and not everyone wants to be a parent, which costs are now only falling on the parents of this child? Is it just an increased insurance cost? Is the insurance divided based on who's married to whom? And is it the married couple who's having the child? If it's not, how are you dividing up percentage-wise where that money is coming from? And like a lot of the time, people default to using the legal system and using marriage or similar benefits to help either mitigate or place upon the people they want to place upon these costs, right? But sometimes you're already legally married and the legally married person is not the one who's taking on the costs. So what you end up doing is like, okay, well, the legally married person is the one whose insurance cost is technically going up, but they're not the actual parent of this child. So the person who is the actual parent of this child is going to pay the married couple back for the increase in cost of now their insurance is bigger, or, oh, their insurance isn't going up because it was already a family plan because it was a married couple, but they're going to have this big cost of the hospital stay. So the parent is going to help pay them back for it. And these are conversations you have to have ahead of the bill coming. Because if you wait until the bill comes, the level of argument that is going to be, I cannot even express.
This is what people, I think a lot of time, when people are having babies, they go to the hospital they just go to the hospital that they assume that they're supposed to go to without really realizing which choice you make here can be a matter of thousands and thousands of dollars.
Well, and I know sometimes you shop for your hospital because actually you shop for your GYN or for your midwife, and they're admitted at a particular hospital, and you don't think about the hospital cost associated. You just think about where your person is admitted, and you don't consider how the cost might be affected there. But those are always just things that as parents we should consider. And then as polyamorous parents, thinking about if you're in a household altogether, whether you're now subdividing household costs and deciding that some children's costs are not household costs, or that parents are going to pay a greater proportion of the household costs because now there are children associated. Some households do that, according to my survey, right? A greater proportion of households do not do that, and all the adults involved pay in equally. But some proportion do say, like, hey, the people who chose to become parents are just paying a greater proportion of costs now because kids are expensive. And we use more electricity and more food and more this and more that. We have a bigger number of rooms in the house because you have kids who need their own rooms. I found that's substantially less common. Mostly people either choose not to form one household or they choose to all consider themselves some degree of supporting these kids.
If for no other reason than it's just an unbelievable amount of math. Like it's just
It tends to be that like at the beginning of the year, you decide what things are separate. And it's usually that like, oh, the parents are paying the daycare bill and the parents are paying 2/3 of the grocery bill, not 1/2 or whatever it is, right? If there are 4 of you, the parents are still paying 2/3, not 1/2, something like that.
Yeah.
But like likewise, who is a parent can be, okay, is it the biological parents of this child? Is it the legal parents of this child? Because in some states, the presumed legal parent is the spouse of the mother, regardless of the biology of the child. And so you have to like file paperwork and potentially do a paternity test to prove that someone else is the father of the child, things like this. And so people might have gone through significant steps to make sure that children are associated with the correct parents or with as many of their parents as possible legally.
Yeah. Have you seen anything crop up like with the freshly born crowd, like with regard to pediatricians, having folks want to like all be in appointments and not be allowed? Have you run into any of that kind of thing?
So pediatricians' offices are mostly really easy. Like most pediatricians' offices have tons of extra lines on their forms for who else can have information released to them. Most pediatricians' offices just like want a single word explanation of who these additional people are. And if you give parent or step parent or guardian as the word next to the person, they don't give a shit. If you're in a really rural or really conservative area, they might want step parent next to the thing, and they might only want mom and dad in the appointments when the kid is like freshly birthed, or they might only want mom and stepmom in the appointments when the kid is freshly birthed because they think that the moms are who's going to be doing care.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of bias toward who do we think will actually be bringing this kid to appointments.
Yes.
And that is, in our culture, gendered care for the most part.
Absolutely.
As much as it's unfair, that is what it is still.
Well, and that leads me to like a totally different question, which is, so Happy Family After, the company that Devon Clement, the host of this podcast, is the founder and CEO of, provides postpartum care for families in Philadelphia and New Jersey and New York City. And I would really appreciate it if you would back me up on something. I have a feeling that you'll back me up here. I'm just going to say it. We get polyamorous families who have just brought home a baby who convince themselves that they shouldn't need postpartum care because there's 3 of them or 4 of them or however many of them. And I think that is just not true. And that if a baby comes into your house, you need help no matter who you are or how many of there are.
I mean, everyone needs help postpartum, especially in our culture where most of us don't have a village, right? So if the company's purpose is to like take the space that used to be held by family members and friends who used to show up and be your village, then yes, they also need that. 3 of you who have all not been sleeping still need help. There being 3 of you who were all not sleeping because all of you heard the baby crying and all of you maybe have an older child who you're trying to take care of at the same time are still kind of a mess. But 3 of you at the same time are better equipped than 1 or 2 of you, right? So when I brought my 12-year-old home, my partner and my meta were finishing renovations on the house that we moved into when he was 4 months old. So I was living with my mother while they were finishing the renovations on the house that at that point had like torn up floors.
Oh, gosh.
And so I had like my partner's help at night 3 nights a week and my mother's help the other 4 nights if she happened to wake up from the baby crying.
Yeah.
And that was significantly harder than 2.5 years later when our daughter was born and all 3 of us were in the same place, even though we also had a toddler. It was just a very different experience. And so I sort of see the logic of the people who are like, well, there's 3 of us. It is easier. And it is slightly. But it's not, you don't need care. It's maybe you're better at prioritizing which care you need. Because one of you has slept a little better and can make the list.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, it does. I think that people do tend to underestimate how light they're going to be sleeping with a new baby, regardless of how you're related to that baby. Like it's a human evolutionary instinct to be able to rouse, right? And when you're constantly, and I'm talking week after week, experiencing that, having somebody who is going to do the laundry and the cooking and the, colic rocking, some of those things really invaluable so that you can put out all of the other tiny fires that have cropped up and maybe even get some decent rest yourself.
Well, and especially when you may not get decent family leave. And like, because I know in the years since we had our children, our state created a mandatory family leave option where if your business doesn't offer it, you can file for it from the state. But not everybody lives in Connecticut. Not everybody has an option to file for family leave. And so if you don't have a safe job where you can get family leave and still go back to your job, a lot of people may be back to work just a few weeks after. And so if you're already back to work and still not sleeping at night, because certainly we were not sleeping at night for 6 months after each kid, at least, probably longer, but certainly for 6 months. And like, that bit of help is necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And living in an intergenerational home, I also did that for a long time. They're incredible helpers and they don't wake up. They frequently do not wake up. I like to encourage people to understand that everybody could benefit from a helper because it is a really cool change to bring about to your household, but it is a change, huge change.
And I know lots of people continue dating while they're pregnant or their partners continue dating while they're pregnant and their metas want to be helpful or their other partners want to be helpful, but they then get really in their head about what that help means, what the proximity of those people means, how those relationships are changing. And so the help feels like it has additional emotional strings attached for people. And so a lot of the work I do in coaching with people is actually about navigating those emotional transitions along with the logistical transitions. Because like the logistical help can be good, but oftentimes for the birthing person, it feels like it comes with a lot of expectation from every human involved, especially when the people are not people who have had their own children, right? I don't know if you guys here at the podcast are familiar with Minna Dubin's book, Mom Rage, but when it's people who have not had their own children and you're going through that like soup of matrescence and of figuring out whether this deal you've been sold is actually what you're getting. And there's all these expectations on you as a mother and on you as a person who's maintaining your house or not maintaining your house. And these people are coming to help you, but it kind of feels like judgment at the same time. Like, I don't know, maybe not everybody was raised as Connecticut as I have been, but like there's a certain amount of why isn't my house the way it is, but people are walking into it.
Yes.
That the help didn't always feel like help, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Or we find that the help isn't really help. It's a thinly veiled surveillance.
Well, and for folks who are dealing with their metas there, is the help really help, or is the help somebody else cuddling with my partner while neither of them do housework? It's the two of them cuddling with my baby and telling me to take a nap, but then no one is doing housework.
Somebody's got to do something.
And like you can feel very possessive of this baby you were carrying 2 weeks ago while all that is happening. And that's a story that I end up hearing in coaching over and over again from people, right? And none of that is ill-intentioned. All of that is well-intentioned, right? Everybody deserves some rest and some care. And often that same meta who that's the thing they observe and they feel like pit of their stomach weird about, that same meta will actually have made dinner and brought it over, or like have cleaned something while they're there, but they also did this thing that was triggering. And so the relationship is very fraught at that moment.
It can be, I mean, it's challenging for the most straightforward, simple math equation of a relationship. It's a strain for that. Add any other variables and, you know, we're starting to look at more difficulty. But I also think that it is also true that with those more intricate situations, that the preparation, any preparation that you do is like turbocharged.
It can really support people to have talked about it ahead of time, to go, hey, these things may come up. I don't mean for it to play that way. I mean to be helpful. I mean to accept the help gracefully, even if I'm not going to be gracious at the moment. And to have that understanding with one another, especially if you have a decent relationship already.
Yeah, trust that.
And like to do one of the phrases in the Relationship Anarchist Manifesto is trust is better. And that's one of those things that you have to try to apply for everyone, not just for your romantic relationships. The idea that the people who give a shit about you care about you and are operating from a place of goodness because they care for you and not because they're trying to sneak something past you at any given time is important.
Yeah. And that comes back to articulation. Like, I think that, I mean, of course, that makes sense to everybody who hears it.
But when you're feeling it in the moment, it's a crash out waiting to happen.
Yeah. And saying, okay, I forgot to remind myself, I'm reminding myself now, this person likes me, loves me, wants the best for me.
Yeah. And in that postpartum moment where your whole brain chemistry is still off and all the hormones are still raging, it can be really hard to feel that. Right. And like, I know I personally made a lot of choices in that time period where I was like, oh, I don't feel like myself yet. I don't want to meet new people. I want to focus on the things I'm focusing on until I feel like myself again. And so I didn't start dating again for about 1.5 years postpartum because I just wanted to feel like I was fully myself by the time I started meeting new people. But I know lots of people who don't make that choice for a variety of reasons, and all of it's equally valid.
For sure. For the people who are going to continue to date throughout pregnancy and like immediately postpartum or whatever they choose, in what ways can they galvanize themselves in order to, I want to say, try to, you know, increase like success in those relationships, but I think success is a really fraught word. I guess what I mean is satisfaction.
I think being really aware of what you're looking for out of those interactions is important, because sometimes people are dating for a good time right now, and sometimes people are dating for a long-term connection, and those two things require very different approaches. And so you need to approach it knowing what you want and being very clear about it. And there are lots of people who are really open to short-term and like fling connections with pregnant people, in which case all you need to do is be careful about your sexual health at that time, because like STIs can be passed to your baby, so be careful. But beyond that, have fun. And like fewer people are open to like long-term connections with people who are presently pregnant. But that doesn't mean you can't seek them. You just have to be really deliberate and clear about what your other connections are, what your bandwidth is, what you're willing to offer people.
Well, I'd love to ask about bandwidth next, because so if you've had one child, every pregnancy and birth is different, but you kind of have an understanding of it. At least you've been to one rodeo, right? But before you've been to the big show, it's very challenging to accurately estimate your bandwidth and how it changes for a hot minute.
And saying like, I don't have a good idea of what it's going to look like after this point, but for while I'm pregnant, I have this kind of time to offer, and I expect it's going to be lower. Are you willing to be around while I figure it out? And know that I might be a little bit of a ghost, a periscoper, appearing and disappearing act postpartum. And are you willing to understand that immediately postpartum, the things that I'm into physically will be less available or very different for a while? And if the person isn't on board for those things, maybe they're not the one for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Because those are the things your long-term partner has to be on board for too, right? The one who's you're having the baby with.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just having another one of those.
I know that we both have, our oldest kids are 12. And I wondered if I come from the buckle of the Bible Belt, Greenville, South Carolina. And I have been doing non-monogamous shenanigans since I was a freshman in high school, which was lascivious, to say the least. Anyway, a lot of the admonishment that I heard was kind of has not been recent, but was a long time ago. But a lot of it was of what I heard was like, what if your kid wanted a relationship like that? What if your kid wanted to? So I asked because my child is in a non-monogamous dating relationship, whatever, however you date at 12. But I wondered if you've got any experience with passing it down.
Well, my kid at 12 does not seem to have any interest in dating. So that has not been a thing for me. One of my Meta's kids is non-monogamous and has been for a few years now. Well, two of my Meta's kids. One of my Metas has a large family, and two of those 5 children are non-monogamous young adults now.
That's a significant percentage, though. That's 40% of the...
One of them is involved in our local kink scene, and so we had to have a sit down with her and be like, hey, let's divide up local events so that you are not at the same thing as dad and all his friends, because that's awkward.
That's not a good time for anybody here.
None of us want to do that. And so, after she came out to a couple of events that we were at, we were like, hey, let's have a sit down about this. We would love for you to have a safe time to explore. And I was like, look, I teach locally. I don't mind if you come to my classes, but I don't want to go to play events together. Let's not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just having those really super clear boundaries. This is what I will do. This is what I'm not going to do. I mean, listen, you're in the kink scene now where it's all about discussion, baby. It's way more. Kink is mostly discussion.
So much more chill than I would have been at 23 to having those conversations. So it was fine.
So you and I grew up, we talk a lot about TV on this podcast. I don't know if you know, we relate a lot through media. And, you and I grew up in a time where it was a very common trope to see on television shows, like a teenager or a young adult walking in on their parents, even, kissing or necking or doing something like that. And it being deeply traumatizing and terrible. We are one generation away from that. And now we're like, all right, get your Google Calendar out, baby girl, because we are going to divide and conquer.
Exactly. Like, I am fully of the generation of we just pretend that our parents did not do these things, despite the fact that we are here and therefore proof of it. And despite the fact that science tells us that kinks are inheritable, so therefore our parents must have been secretly freaky because we didn't see them doing it in public, right? So we're a generation later and we're like, oh, we're trying to be sex positive and kind. So every time the children were exploring something and we noticed, we were like, here are some resources, walk away from the teenagers, let them be. And so 10 years later, one of them is in the scene and we're like, it is unpleasant to be at the same events though. So we're gonna tell you which ones we're gonna divide and conquer through though, because that's weird. And they're like, that is weird. Thank you.
Love that. I love that. We have a really large event here called Frolicon. Are you familiar with Frolicon?
Yes.
That is a situation where, having to say like, all right, here's my plans. This is the day that I'm doing a day pass and this is my day pass and nobody go.
One that's like hotel con sized. I feel like they could go, okay, I'm going all weekend and so are you. Let's skip some classes. Let's pick a night each for the dungeon.
Let's, appropriately
coordinate.
Yeah. Maybe we don't need to take like a family van.
Yeah. Separate cars for sure.
Maybe we travel separately. We're not the Partridge Family, guys. Let's deboard this bus.
Let's really, though.
So we've gone from pregnancy. We've gone through, going to the pediatrician. We've gone through kids, making friends with people that we are dating, the kids of the people that we're dating, or the like metas that we have. We've talked about our kids being polyamorous themselves or not. I think that what I would love to end on would be, what do you have to say, if you could say one thing to grandparents in polyamorous or multi-adult families, what would you tell grandparents?
I think I have two things. The first is that about 6% of US adults are currently in polyamorous relationships. This is not like a weird thing that only your child is doing. It is not your child and 4 people they know and no one else.
Yeah, we're doing a whole podcast episode about it.
Well, sure. But like, even beyond that, it's not like 3 people on podcasts across the internet either. This is not like a fringe internet situation. This is a significant portion of North American adults. There are as many people as are queer are polyamorous at this point. And the reason that's important is that as much as it is not a legally protected class, it is a significant number of people. And if that many of us have been doing it for a pretty significant amount of time, the kids are okay. No one is messing up their children. Polyamorous people have regular boundaries, just like everyone else. As much as I get to talk laughingly about my friend subdividing his Google Calendar with his kids, for the most part, polyamorous people are not mentioning their sex lives to their kids any more than any other parent. Their kids are equally like, ew, mom and dad do what? As any other teenager. We have regular ass boundaries. No one is being weird or more sexual than other people. Polyamory is not an outside of bounds kind of situation. It's just people in multiple relationships. It's not that hard to wrap your head around. Instead of boy loves girl, it's boy loves girl and other girl. Or girl loves couple of boys. It's not that hard.
It's really not. And, I like to try to very gently, but very firmly, remind many of these folks, like, listen, y'all used to know everybody's business. It just wasn't talked about. We just are willing to talk about it.
Yeah.
Instead of Jim having to go, never getting to stay at Betty's apartment, everybody knows that Jim and Betty are dating, even though he's married to Maryland.
And I do sometimes joke with my partner that part of why polyamory and non-monogamy are having such a moment in the sun is that we all have phones and have so much more of a surveillance state now than we used to. Because some of it is just that even the people who would rather be lying can't at this point. And so they've had to fess up and figure out what to do with themselves. And the upside of that is that more people are learning to be decent communicators along the way. And while there is some messiness there, there is also a significant amount of personal growth that's happening for people.
Well, and there's public health growth. There's fewer STI infections. The rate of teen pregnancy has plummeted. Like, there has been a lot of really positive and obvious public health outcomes from this emergence and this being, willingness to be discussed and to be seen. It's huge.
I mean, look, we've been working on lowering the teen pregnancy rate since the 80s, but don't worry, the current administration is going to try to get it back up.
They sure are. I have seen a couple of different, you and I are on the same platforms, right? We're on Threads, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're on a lot of different things. And I don't know if you saw this same thing, but I'd be willing to bet the house that you did. In one day, I saw 4 different influencers discussing not even why they believed, but just that they believed that our age women being on birth control then contributed to a higher rate of IVF conception.
Mm-hmm. Look,
almost the same script for every video.
It's between that and the Fox News bits about how the birth rate being down age 15 to 19 is a problem. I am exhausted, and being a modern woman is tiring, but we keep doing it every day.
We soldier on, and I think that doing life the way that we're doing it is a particularly egalitarian way to do it if you're doing it right, and there's a lot to be said for that. We really like that over here on the podcast.
And if you're trying to be more egalitarian, the number one reason that people end relationships that are cohabiting, whether you're monogamous or polyamorous, is over the division of household labor. So keep going for it, ladies. You will eventually find good ones.
Yeah, absolutely you will. Absolutely you will. I know that I did. Listen, I have had such a wonderful time talking to you, Laura Boyle from Ready for Polyamory. If anybody is listening and is themselves practicing consensual non-monogamy and or polyamory and is looking to welcome a baby, but would like to have some of that good old-fashioned intention that we have been talking about, and a vocabulary for the dialogue that's going to be necessary with your providers, with your partners and metas, with, your neighbors and the school teachers, etc. Would love for people to be in touch with Laura Boyle. We will put the way to do that in the show notes.
Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Laura, it's been great talking to you, and I hope that you have an exceptional day. Everybody read Monogamy in This Economy immediately.
To be sure you never miss an episode, be sure to follow in your favorite podcast app. We'd also love to connect with you on social media. You can find us on Instagram at Happy Family After, or at our website, happyfamilyafter.com. On our website, you can also leave us a voicemail with any questions or thoughts you might have, and you can roast your baby. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Parenthood Prep. If you want to learn more about the services Devon offers, as well as access her free monthly newborn care webinars, head on over to www.happyfamilyafter.com.